As a nation, we are experiencing the three phases of grief. First, we were in denial. Now we're grieving, and a little bit of anger is starting to set in as we watch the reactions of people across the nation. It is shocking and it does make you angry. Would you agree with that, Emerald Robinson?
Yeah, I've been angry for a while, honestly, John.
I feel you. Well, Emerald is a national correspondent. She had a gig on Newsmax for a good while until she started telling the truth about the vaccine. And now she's on Lindell TV, and she is also a friend of mine. Emerald, welcome to the truth. Um, you wrote a Substack today about what happened uh, to Charlie Kirk, and it certainly a lot of it had the ring of truth to it. You want to step us through the irregularities that you've uncovered, the things that don't pass the smell test?
Yeah, thanks for having me, John. I really appreciate it, and it's good to see you again. What I would say, I wrote this Substack first thing this morning, and it was before the local law enforcement and the state attorney general, or excuse me, the district attorney did their press conference. But I still didn't get answers to the questions that I put in that Substack. I think the questions that I wrote about this morning still stand despite today's press conference. Now, I will start out with the first one being, why does none of this ring true to me? Okay. And that this Robinson kid is the actual assassin. Well, first of all, I admittedly was watching the press conference on Fox News, and John Roberts of Fox News, the, Canadian anchor, former VJ, said that this is a pretty open and shut case based on what he just heard, and John Roberts is always wrong. So that's number one.
Okay.
But no, in all seriousness, I still think my main question is, where's the murder weapon in the videos? Okay, we know what law enforcement is telling us about the murder weapon they found in the woods. But if you look at the videos, John, and you talk to, you're down in, you're from the South. I'm sure you're familiar with some of the guns. And I talked to a lot of my cousins. I talked to a lot of former military members. I talked to gun experts. Everyone that I spoke with agrees that there's no way he had that gun in his pants, right? Like they said, you don't see the gun in any of the videos. They say there's no way, because of the complexity of that and the age of that gun, he could have assembled that on the roof. Okay, fast forward to when he jumps off the roof, right? That's the most infamous video
Right.
of the shooter, the alleged shooter. There's no gun in that video, right? He didn't take
Didn't he
a
drop
gun off
something?
the roof.
Didn't he drop something to the ground that?
It was a bag.
Yeah.
It was his bag, but it wasn't big enough to carry that kind of gun from everybody that I spoke to about
Okay.
it.
All right.
And they suddenly find it in the woods, assembled. A lot of people ask questions, especially hunters, about the scope. So that's kind of number one for me. Where was the gun in the video? Where's the autopsy? I think if you look at multiple angles of, and I unfortunately have done so now to my chagrin, but I felt like it was important to look at the video of the actual wound as it was being made. You have to question, and I've seen a lot of first responders online and nurses say that it looks more like an exit wound from the front than the entry wound. And there's several angles of the video that does call that into question. It doesn't, you could say it looks like in some of the video that the bullet's actually entering in the back of the neck and throwing him forward.
I had not heard that or thought about it, but I will tell you,
go back and watch it,
that I have very consciously thought that the story that we've been told, that he had on a bulletproof vest and that the bullet hit the vest, ricocheted, and hit him in the throat, it just doesn't ring true to me, frankly, that a bullet would ricochet off the bulletproof vest and go up and into the throat. I've had serious questions about that, frankly.
Well, and if you look at other pictures of Charlie as he was engaging with the crowd and he was throwing the hats, he had on a white T-shirt. You could see his nipples. It doesn't look like he had on a bulletproof vest in certain lighting as he was standing and throwing the hat. So I think that
Interesting.
would call that into question.
Jeez. I don't want another conspiracy theory. I just want something that's simple and irrefutable, and it feels like here we go again. And
What it
that's
is,
not
here we
directed at
go
you.
again.
I want the truth, but I just
You're,
wish that for once we could get something that was clear and um, indefensible, and it seems like that's not the case.
well, it is here we go again, John, because there are too many parallels between the Butler assassination and the Butler assassination and the attempt on Charlie Kirk's life, right? Because let's think about it. In both instances, they cleared up the crime scene. Now, if you're an investigator, the first thing the first rule is you never tamper with or you never clean a crime scene. And that's what they did in both of these cases,
No
John.
question.
Remember, in Butler, they washed down the roof.
That is undeniable. You are 100% correct.
And now in the case of what's going on in Utah, they're actually doing construction on the site. They immediately started taking everything down in Utah. You just wouldn't do that, John. That is literally the biggest no-no in investigations. So why are they doing? They did that with Butler. And with there's so many parallels between Butler and Charlie Kirk's assassination. But of course, we shouldn't be that surprised that there was an attempt on Charlie Kirk's life, and unfortunately, it was tragically successful because there's been no accountability. There's been no real investigation into the Butler assassination. In fact, 2 attempts on the president's life prior to this assassination of Charlie Kirk.
Well, we've done a lot of reporting on Butler. That is laughable, frankly, that the official story that we've been told. There are so many irregularities, and they say, oh, well, these were just mistakes. Well, how many mistakes do you have to have before it adds up to be intent? And that's the point that I've made. And the AGR building was intentionally removed from the security circle. It's like a piece of pie that is intentionally cut out. And as we now know, we know from Dealey Plaza that rooftops are incredibly leave the person exposed. And so why would you not cover the rooftop in Butler? But Charlie, unlike what some people are saying, was not a political figure. He was a free thinker, and he was expressing his freedom of speech. He had his political biases, but he has never been elected to office, and he's never run for office. Not yet.
He was definitely on his way to potentially being, and I believe that was his end game. I mean, there had been some talk about him being a future VP running mate.
Yeah. Well, like yourself, I'm sure you knew Charlie. I've known Charlie for 8 years, and I've seen him a lot over that period of time. I asked him point blank when he came to the Palm Beach Republican Party Club if he would consider himself to be a candidate for vice president before JD was picked. And he was addressing our organization. He kind of laughed. He said, well, there's one major problem with that. I'm only 31. You have to be 35 to qualify. So, but he did clearly leave the door open for the future. I don't think there's any question that he had a bright political career ahead of him. But to say that he's a political figure, I think would be stretching it a bit. I would think you'd have to have participated in elective office before you could be classified as a political figure. But clearly he had strong feelings, and these people really get under my skin. They call him fascist, sexist, misogynist, a Nazi. And I'm like, well, tell me what of his talk would ring like a Nazi? Patriotism, belief in God, family, doing the right thing. I mean, those I would hope would be ideals that we could all agree on. I don't know why that would result in name calling, other than they just didn't like his conservative views. Does it bother you, Emerald, like it bothers me that these people are going around saying that Charlie Kirk was a Nazi when what he talked about was not hate like they allege, but instead he talked about patriotism, respecting our flag, believing in God, believing in the sanctity of life. Are those Nazi uh, from Nazi dogma? I mean, what's to hate there?
We're not dealing with honest actors. This is um, communist, leftist talking points, right? And their propaganda has particularly been used on, let's say, the Charlie's demographic when he would go and have these talks, higher education in the universities and those institutions. They're not calling him that in good faith. It's their projection. They don't believe in civil discourse. They do not believe in debate. John, the only thing they understand is violence. And we saw that come to a head with Charlie. And look, like you said, Charlie was as far from a Nazi as you can get. He engaged with them in good faith. In fact, I say he's the nice one, right? Because he believed you could still have good, honest debate, or he thought if he just showed you that you could, right? And if he proved to you that you were wrong on the merits and on the arguments, that he could sway you to the right side or to at least thinking rationally. But that's not what they want. They're closed off to it. They don't want that. And so I fear we will see more of this unless there's some real accountability, which I don't think we're seeing yet if we're not having an honest investigation. Now, you heard President Trump talk about labeling these as terrorist groups. It is a larger operation than people understand, right? We have been infiltrated by communist Marxists. They are influencing the youth. And we have to counter that. We haven't done an effective job of it yet. And we probably won't be able to do it by debate.
So let's get back to the theater. Do you think Tyler Robinson acted alone?
No, I don't think he was even the assassin. I think he might think he is. And how often have we seen this? Lee Harvey Oswald said he wasn't. I don't believe in the confession even. How many times, even studies show that often people falsely confess. This kid, I think we'll learn he's probably got some special needs. He was talking to people on Discord. FBI Director Kash Patel said today in his testimony on the Hill that they're looking into some 20 people on Discord. Oh, and another thing that makes it theater for me is the Forrest Gump of terrorist events was there. One named George Zinn. Somehow he was at 9/11 and he's, archived footage of him in interviews saying he knew it was Al Qaeda has surfaced. He called in a bomb threat or whatever to the Salt Lake City Marathon. And he gets up and says, shoot me, shoot me, shoot me. He was an obvious decoy. This is an operation if you look at it. And as fast as they're trying to shut it down and as fast as they're trying to tell you it's this kid and erase the crime scene, they cleaned the crime scene. John, we are just a few days removed from the assassination. You would never do that. They pack up the tent, the gear, they're doing construction. The FBI immediately cleaned the crime scene before it was even really forensically analyzed. That's an obvious clue to us, John, if we just pay attention that the FBI was cleaning up the operation just as they did in Butler, Pennsylvania. I'm sure you said you've reported on this extensively, so your audience knows the kind of action they took under the guise of investigating it.
So what do you think's behind it? Who do you think is behind it, or do you have any insight or even supposition?
I can only say that there could be multiple possibilities. Charlie was a threat to several entities, I believe. He is a threat to the leftist Marxist ideology, right? That is so pervasive on college campuses. That's absolutely true. Now, do I think this kid acted alone? No. I think there's a larger movement that, let's say it's the leftist tranny terrorist group. I think there's a larger operation behind this kid. And I still don't think he was the assassin based on whatever I've seen. If they present me with evidence that is more conclusive, then okay. But I don't believe it. And I talked to a lot of people at the angle of the shot and this kid, it just doesn't make sense. Could there be the leftist Antifa or trans terrorism behind him? Yeah. And that is a more organized group than people understand. There's getting to be more some reporting on it. Could it be a bad nation state actor using this tranny terrorist? Sure. Which one? I know you're not, that's question, right? Is he even a threat to the deep state and our own intel? Sure, because Charlie talked about the deep state a lot. I hadn't watched him much over the years, but now that, since the assassination, I went back and watched a lot of what he had to say, and he had really started to ask some questions that put you on a list, that put you under surveillance, that make you a target. And had he been questioning Israel, he had. I didn't know to the extent, but what's interesting, and I haven't shared this, I don't think on air anywhere, but I have told many people this behind the scenes because I had joked about it. I had gotten calls from, like those APAC types, because they call everybody. They don't just call members of Congress. They court journalists too. And in recent months, especially since Signalgate, John, I've been getting a weekly call. I've been getting almost a weekly call since President Trump won the election. And it was just friendly. Oh, I think you're so great. You're so inspirational. How can I help you? I just want to help you. Okay. And then I got more frequent calls after Signalgate. Remember about the release of messages or the leaking of messages that involved Pete Hegseth, JD Vance,
yes,
former national security advisor. Why is his name leaving me at the moment? Waltz. There was concern, and they would ask me, why is Pete Hegseth not with us anymore? And I said, I think he is. I don't know what you're seeing, but all indications to me is that he is. And then with Charlie, they were asking me about Charlie too. And I blew it off. I said, look, I don't know. They would say, why isn't he with us? Why is he turning on Israel? I'd be like, I don't know. I don't talk to Charlie. I don't even watch Charlie. From what I understand, he's with you too. And when I found out he had been shot, I couldn't help but think about that. So I don't know. But I'm not buying the official narrative that there's this, lone shooter kid. Okay. I think there's more to it. And I don't know for sure who's behind it, but there's a lot of tough questions that need to be asked because this is a pivotal moment in our society, in our country.
All right. So what does it say about Kash Patel and Dan Bongino, who we are told are the most truthful people on earth? And if they say it, it must be true.
We're all of a sudden trusting the same FBI that is still holding the Seth Rich laptop hostage, although a judge has ordered it to be released. We still don't know what happened to Seth Rich. And they could technically release that laptop to his attorney, Ty Clevenger, who's been fighting it in court. But even under this current FBI, they're not handing that over. A lot of the things they've said over the last few months just hasn't sat well with anyone. It sounds like, based on today, right before you and I jumped on, Dan Bongino isn't long for the FBI anyway. They already brought in the co-FBI director. Mm-hmm. Everybody knows that doesn't happen. Andrew Bailey of Missouri. So that was indications that he's out. And I think Dan and Kash Patel both look scared to death. I don't know what's happened to them since they went to Washington, D.C., but they look scared to death. And I'll tell you, I have a colleague who lives in Dan's building, and they say he about jumps out of his skin at any sound. Like you'll pass him. You definitely don't talk to him. They made the mistake of saying, "Hey, Dan." and he chewed their head off. He's like, you can't just talk to me, and like all paranoid and scared like. So
That's weird.
it's
He
really
doesn't seem that type. But I did read not too long ago that they recruited 50 people to protect Dan Bongino at his desk in the FBI, and that they had to go outside of the bureau to find people that were actually would be loyal to him. Now, that's got to tell you something. 50 people to protect him while he's at his desk? What's that about?
I don't think Dan will be with the agency or the bureau very long. I don't know if they've been intimidated or if they're scared or if they're relying on the career people who still surround them, because look, there hasn't been that much turnover, and especially if you look at the Washington field office, right? It's not it's still swampy. Everything's still swampy. And so sometimes these people get in there and they think they meet these people that they thought they were going to get rid of. And then they're very good at smoozing them, pretending, look, I just did what I had to do. I was just doing my job. But man, am I so glad you're here. I'm with you. And they talk their way into staying in position. And then in the meantime, they're misdirecting the principles that were put in place by the administration. They're making sure that certain intelligence doesn't reach them, or they're giving them bad intel. That's not just happening at the FBI. That's also happening in the intelligence community at large still, because I can tell you that specifically in my dealings with the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. Tulsi Gabbard has had to fight real hard, like very hard, to get the real intelligence on, obviously my focus is election fraud, and now that's led me to Venezuela. And there have been many blockers in the intelligence community trying to make sure she can't get the intelligence product. Remember, she said publicly she found burn bags of evidence of 2020 election fraud. And then when she went to give the president a report on election fraud and our election security, they talked her into leaving out 2020. And so President Trump got that, and it was an executive summary. We thought he'd gotten the full report. Turns out he didn't, because they didn't let Tulsi do it.
Well, you may remember that I've worked very hard for 2.5 years
Yeah.
on the Georgia election, 2020 election. I've seen the evidence. I've spoken to the witnesses. I've played devil's advocate with the forensic accountants. There is zero doubt in my mind that Georgia wasn't stolen in 2020. Not by a few votes, 40,000 in Fulton County alone and 400,000 in the state, according to Joe Rossi and David Cross, who are both numbers guys who have devoted an inordinate amount of their lives to peeling back the layers to look. Just today, the Georgia Supreme Court fortunately upheld the Court of Appeals and ruled that Fani Willis could not serve as a prosecutor in her persecution of the Trump 19. So they're now talking about finding a new prosecutor to carry on the case. I'm disappointed that they didn't go further and recommend that the Georgia bar remove her for her inappropriate and unethical conduct. Nevertheless, 2020 was real, but I can tell you that, I ran for Attorney General of Georgia with President Trump's endorsement because I was frustrated that no one would give us justice. You couldn't get it in the courts. The constitutional officers failed us. The media flagrantly lied. And I had many, 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 many conversations with members of the media. And when I would start to give them the facts, their eyes would just gloss over. So one of my disappointments is that after the election was over, the Trump world has not embraced me any longer. And I've noticed a pattern that people that were involved in 2020 election stuff are not really invited into the tent any longer.
You're right. And I'll tell you two nuggets. Yeah. And one relates to Charlie Kirk. I learned on Friday, as I was sitting in a briefing with a source working in the government on this issue, that when they were just outside investigators, they took this to Charlie Kirk. Some of the information that I've been releasing in my very long thread on X on the 2020 election that leads into 2024. I'm almost 200 tweets in now, I think, in the thread. It's pinned to the top of my X account at Emerald Robinson. If your audience isn't familiar with what I'm talking about and they want to go check it out, I've tried to make an archive, an extensive history of what happened between 2020 and now. So, in getting some intelligence briefing on Friday, I was told, because, it was the day after his death and the person felt that they could reveal this now. They were very saddened. They said, look, we took this to Charlie. He was one of the first people we took it to give this information to the public. And he turned us down, saying, I've been warned not to touch this, and I'm not going to touch it. And if Charlie Kirk had touched it, a lot more people would have been talking about it. And he seemed like he had a little bit of immunity right to backlash on something like that. But he had been told not to touch it, and he wouldn't touch it. Okay.
I'm processing. I'm trying to sort through that. But I'm telling you, I think there are people that are high up in the administration that don't want President Trump to look at 2020. I think they want to close the book on it and move on. And, a lot of my friends say, oh, well, that's old news. Let's move on.
It's
well,
not.
I'll buy that. Okay, let's move on. But let's don't let it happen again. And if we cover up the truth and don't expose it for what it is, what guarantee do we have of a republic that we can have any faith in our franchise actually meaning something? That's my paradigm. And it seems to be commonsensical to me that we should uncover the truth of 2020 and that we reform our elections in the United States. I think Trump is actually working around these people and
he is
espousing things like paper ballots and shorter voting and no absentee voting except when necessary.
And wanting to have an investigation into it. And I'll tell you, you are absolutely right when you say that there are people around President Trump that don't want actively turn away people who talk about 2020 and want to even keep still the president from getting to the bottom of it. And I can tell you how as well. Why I know that. Because with that intelligence report that I told you about Tulsi Gabbard, okay, when she was, they were compiling the report and they were setting the circumstances and the time to give it to President Trump. Not only did she get pushed back from the now ousted director, Defense Intelligence Agency director, Jeff Cruz. He just got let go a couple weeks ago.
Yes.
He was a major blocker. But someone in Susie Wild's office called her and told her, I think this is why she didn't include it in the executive summary, and Trump was not happy about it. They told her, do not include the 2020 election. We don't need him to get distracted by that. We got to focus on 2026. And so then when she presented the executive summary to President Trump, he was very upset that it wasn't all encompassing. He said, what is this? With some expletives that you can imagine. And he's like, why isn't this in there? And who's the conspiracy? Who's behind it? Like, is it Venezuela? Because that's what you kind of been telling me. And, we're doing all this. So there are people high up in the White House who are making sure that anyone who talks about 2020 isn't in his orbit. Yeah. And that the intelligence on 2020 still isn't making its way to him. Like, they're the ones who decide.
So is it possible that they are being politically astute, that talking about 2020 is not a popular conversation and that people do want to move on, and so that it's better just to maybe take the lumps and plan for the future and leave 2020 alone? Personally, I think it traces directly back to the deep state. I mean, we now know that Bill Barr was in Fani Willis's ear, coaching her and mentoring her on how to conduct this indictment, this fake, phony, absurd indictment in a RICO charge. I mean, this just reeks of deep state to me. And maybe that is why there is, maybe it's healthy distancing from it. I don't know.
No, it's not healthy. It's not. And especially if the president of the United States, the commander in chief, believes that there has been a nefarious operation conducted by a foreign nation state against our country, specifically our elections, which he has seen evidence of, and he asks you for that report, you give it to him, right? So it's not even about the public dialogue or discourse. This is about our national security, and he is the commander in chief, and he's in charge of ensuring our national security. Because yes, it can still happen again. 2024, we were given a lifeline, okay, and that was with a little help, but that won't happen again. I've been assured. I believe so. Here is what I have been, some of the evidence I've seen and what has been shared with me by multiple sources that are working with Tulsi, with people at the DOJ. A lot of this does go back directly to our agency. Yes, is China involved? Is Serbia involved? Yes. Is Venezuela involved? Yes. Cuba too. I know it sounds crazy, right? Because we think of them as like failed third world countries. They are very influential, especially Venezuela, and they've got, it's a $4 trillion cartel industry. It's got major infrastructure, and they're tied to China, they're tied to Iran, they're tied to Serbia. But there are Americans who have helped them, and they're not just Democrats. And these are names that a lot of people in that influential political world know quite well and have worked together with in some capacity, or at least, kind of hobnob with along the way. And when they found out some of these people were involved, some of these people were on trial, they were shocked. And it's a little bit scary, so I think we have a crisis in courage, and we still have a CIA that is very involved in keeping this under wraps, because at the end of the day, they're involved as well. In fact, Patrick Byrne dropped on my show a nugget that allegedly John Brennan, and it sounds unbelievable, but I talked to a couple other people who confirmed this was true. They said it was true. I'm saying this is allegedly. John Brennan is business partners with the oligarch in Serbia that runs the Belgrade Dominion office that holds the data on Chinese Huawei servers.
I've been saying for a long time that I feel this federal government is rotten to its core. And you take somebody like John Brennan, who had perhaps the top of the pinnacle in terms of career bureaucrat wielding immense power. And they're willing to do things that you and I would never contemplate, i.e. kill people. They literally kill people.
Yeah.
And I watched a former CIA agent. I don't know. Do you ever watch Julian Dory?
No,
it's a
I
podcast.
Haven't.
He's in New Jersey. He's a young guy. He is brilliant. He has some great guests on. But he's been on a tear about JFK and about the CIA, and he's got a CIA agent who John Brennan caused to be incarcerated for 2 years. They bankrupted him. And so now he's just angry and willing to tell it all. And he said John Brennan had weekly Tuesday meetings where they would talk about who was going to be eliminated.
Wow.
And that they almost seemed, these are my words interpreting what he said, but they almost seemed gleeful over the things that they were doing. And I presume that these were foreign actors and foreign countries that they labeled as a threat to the United States. But these people clearly operate outside the bounds of the law, out of the margins, and have unlimited sources of money and access to money, our taxpayer money, and no oversight, zero. No, and I think the people that are in charge of the oversight have either been to Epstein Island or they're on the take. I don't know. That's supposition, but I cannot come up with another plausible explanation for why this stuff continues to go on.
Well, Congressman Tim Burchett, he always corrects me, of Tennessee has explicitly said publicly many times how the blackmail operation in Congress works. Ted Cruz has alluded to the idea that the FBI runs Congress. There have been multiple members of Congress who've been courageous enough to admit that Congress has a blackmail problem, and that is our intelligence community that is blackmailing them. And talking about John Brennan, I don't think he sees them as enemies to the United States. I think he considers himself an enemy to the American ideas. I think he's definitely overcome with communist ideology, and that's what he subscribes to. I'll tell you something else about his CIA. During his tenure as the director of the Central Intelligence Agency, there was intelligence product coming in from across the world from station chiefs about the flipping of elections in other countries and how it worked. And from what I understand from a very prolific former agent and a station chief, is that this product, it still exists. Tulsi has it, okay? Director Gabbard has it, but it's been there the whole time. And it wouldn't have been that just Brennan saw it, because we understand that Brennan's bent. What's sort of hard to fathom is that actually these products probably went to about 300 people, had their eyes on it. Okay. And they knew that these elections could be rigged and have been rigged in other countries, and nobody did anything about it. This wasn't some secret for Brennan's eyes only. They were all well aware that these elections have been rigged in other countries and could probably be rigged here. Obviously, Brennan was probably conducting a lot of this. So we still here. I asked somebody the other day, how much of a hold does Brennan still have on our intelligence community? And they said, you have to understand, probably about 70% of the members of the intelligence community owe their allegiance to Brennan, that they were put in place there. He pushed out anyone who wasn't loyal to him or to his ideology and replaced them. They explain, and this was a former station chief, you would have to do a massive wipeout of the higher ups, particularly, to try to even start to fix the problem. And they likened it to a few years ago when Iran found out that we had infiltrated their military and that we had many assets, like, several dozen assets, but they didn't know which ones. They knew that we had recruited several dozen and placed them in the military. They didn't know. So what they did is they wiped out 10,000 to get rid of the several dozen that were disloyal to them and working with the U.S. And, a few of the former Intel members that I've talked to that got pushed out said that's basically what you'd have to do. You'd have to do a wipeout. And they were like, honestly, we probably operate better because look at how subversive they're being. You won't notice a difference in national security, they said, as far as it being worse. It might actually be better.
Do you think Tulsi Gabbard has the intestinal fortitude to continue to dog this? I was hopeful that Russia would be chapter 1. I was optimistically hoping that 2020 would be chapter 2, and that chapter 3 would be the goods on Butler and a true accounting of what happened there. And that therefore the American people would be so outraged that there was nothing that could stop the reform of the intelligence community. Now I'm starting to wonder. I just don't know. It seems like things have slowed down a bit. I don't know.
Yeah.
Certainly the tragedy with Charlie Kirk has derailed whatever momentum may have been there.
It was already slowing down before that.
It felt that way to me.
Yeah, it had started slowing down. There's blockers within the intelligence community, blockers within the administration. There's not many people at the DOJ that want to do anything about any of these issues you mentioned. Tulsi Gabbard herself wants to. I think that she might not have the institutional knowledge of how to exactly go about that, and that has crippled her a little bit. But as far as the intestinal fortitude, she has it, as long as she can keep Trump on her side. right? And keep backing her because it's been a
Yes.
slower going process. So I think that's where that stands. I will say, though, there is some good work going on, but I don't think it's enough and fast enough. We shall see. There's one shoot a drop that I'm waiting on this week, and I don't know if the assassination of Charlie Kirk possibly derailed that at all. And I probably won't know that till the end of the week.
Well, we will continue to follow you on
Thank you.
Lindell Television and also on your Substack. You can find Emerald Robinson there. And I am a frequent reader of your material, and I'm
Thank you.
always captivated by it. And you stimulate the neurons in my brain and curiosity. I really appreciate what you do, Emerald. And we appreciate your coming on the show. And I'm fortunate to be able to call you a friend. Thank you very much.
Likewise. And I just want to say, John, that it probably doesn't feel good, but it speaks well of you if you're being shunned, because that means you really are telling the truth if you're not invited to as many events. And I too have found out that the hard way. I will let people know that they can read my latest on the Charlie Kirk assassination, Who Killed Charlie Kirk, at emerald.tv. That's my Substack.
Very good. Well, thank you, Emerald, and
Thanks, John.
have a good rest of your week. And again, thanks for your generosity of time.
You too. Thanks, John.